In 2018, Facebook endured a tumultuous year that resulted in a brutal hammering from users, businesses, investors, and government agencies around the world. The reason was a media report implicating Facebook in a major data hacking scandal that saw the personal data of millions of users sold to a private company. The crisis would cost the company millions and shake up the very way Facebook operates. The crisis management strategy employed by Facebook to deal with the fallout is a model for both what and what not to do when faced with an organizational crisis. But to understand what happened, we need to understand how the crisis began. The first allegations of a data breach came in 2015 with a story about US politician Ted Cruz employing a company called Cambridge Analytica to assist in his political campaign. It was alleged that the company illicitly purchased the harvested data of millions of Facebook users from its British parent company Strategic Communication Laboratories, or SCL. Subsequent stories dropped in 2016, however the stories never gained much traction as Facebook swatted away inquiries with the standard corporate response of, "We are investigating." In 2017, The Observer dropped a news story headlined "The Great Brexit Robbery," again claiming that Cambridge Analytica illegally used the data of millions of Facebook pages, this time citing an anonymous source. But the article drew skepticism, and Facebook refused to comment on it. Again, the standard response they gave was that they were investigating the allegations. As early as 2015, Facebook knew that personal data from its users had been harvested and sold to Cambridge Analytica. Skepticism surrounding the news meant that it wasn't yet a crisis for Facebook, but it was an issue. Jacka says that issue management is about steering the ship out of troubled water. Facebook, knowing that a news story about personal data breach could seriously damage its business viability, did minimal to address the potential public perception of the issue. Had they self-reported the breach, gone public and stressed that they were fixing the problem, the consequences may have been less severe. But neglecting to act and allowing themselves to be outed by the media projected the image that Facebook was trying to cover up the breach. To understand how this can turn into a crisis, we have to understand what a crisis is. Pearson and Clare state that a crisis is a low probability, high impact event that threatens the viability of an organization. The event that causes a crisis is newsworthy enough to attract the attention of the media and catapults the organization into the spotlight and draws scrutiny from its stakeholders. The question is, could this event draw enough attention that it turns into a crisis for Facebook? A large organization, millions of people's privacy, and the implication of government organizations? And finally, on the 17th of March 2018, The Guardian and The New York Times simultaneously released articles revealing that data from 50 million Facebook profiles had been mined through a Facebook quiz app and sold to a company called Cambridge Analytica. Data that was used to help the election campaigns of US politicians Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, as well as other political campaigns like Brexit. The difference between these articles and the ones published in 2015 to 2017 was the citing of ex-Cambridge Analytica employee Christopher Wylie as the whistleblower. Christopher Wylie's input was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Defining the crisis. Jackass lists 9 types of crises that an organization may face. Facebook first had a technological issue, a problem paradigm that involves triggers such as hacking, data loss, and breaches of privacy. This turned into a management crisis, where mishandling of the issue by management resulted in a crisis later on. The term smoldering crisis is appropriate because the event was not sudden, like an explosion, for example, but was rather forewarned, but not acted on. Therefore, the issue sat bubbling and smouldering until it was ready to explode. The crisis was entirely internal and controllable, given that the media advised Facebook of the issue 3 years prior to it reaching crisis point. The reason why this crisis was so damaging for Facebook can be explained using stakeholder theory. Stakeholder theory dictates that issues can turn into crises when a gap exists between the expected and actual behavior of an organization. Register and Larkin state that this gap can relate to how a company demonstrates transparency or accountability in responding to an issue or event. Essentially, this means that an organization should act the way its stakeholders expect it to act, and if there is a gap, the organization should be open and honest in how it plans to close the gap. Facebook's viability is entirely dependent on its biggest stakeholder, its user base. Without users, Facebook would simply not exist, and if the user doesn't feel that their privacy is being protected, then the user will most likely switch off. Businesses who advertise on Facebook would not want to be aligned with an organization or be implicated in a scandal with an organization that can't protect its users' privacy. It's not good business. While government organizations would be deeply concerned with these issues because it can involve breaches of law that could then spark legal cases or even lead to law reform. When the story first came to light in 2015, Facebook was not transparent in the way it went about handling the data breach. It made initial statements advising that it was investigating the breach and advising that it would ban any company that violates its terms of service. However, it neglected to address any public concern about how this could happen, whether it could happen again, or how many people were in fact affected. But rather, it attempted to sweep the issue under the rug with standard corporate response. What Facebook failed to do was look at the issue from the perspective of its stakeholders. When it was revealed exactly how many users were affected, some 87 million, there was public outcry. When it came out that Cambridge Analytica may not have actually destroyed the data as it said it did, Facebook faced a crisis. When the media got its hands on a story that concerns the politics of a divided nation, one of the largest and most influential brands in history, and the sacred privacy of private citizens, Facebook was in panic mode. Facebook and its executives, particularly Mark Zuckerberg, were under a microscope. The world's media were frantically coming up with new stories and new angles about every aspect of the crisis. Speculation is rife. The business is taking a hit on the stock market. People are questioning whether Facebook is safe anymore, or is it better to #delete Facebook. When Jack has said that issues management is about steering the ship out of troubled water, he also said that crisis management is about saving the ship after it has struck an iceberg. Crisis management, according to McLean and Power, is for the crisis-ridden organization to return in a stronger position than prior to the crisis. The old saying, "the best defense is always a good offense," is appropriate for crisis management. Prevention should always be the goal. However, when this fails, preparedness can be the difference between successful crisis management or failure. This means having a plan that outlines the organization's response and the path to recovery. However, not all organizations are prepared for crisis events, and when the time comes for action, their responses are lacking. Through their observations, Wilcox et al. Note 3 response routes businesses usually take when responding to a crisis. The first is to deny or ignore the crisis. The second is to attempt to manage the crisis by only providing minimal, redacted, delayed or inaccurate information in an attempt to hide the damage. The third option is to adopt a policy of open and accurate communication and maintain channels of communication with outside sources. The first two options risk creating a poor public image and damaging the reputation of the organization. The last option may provide greater backlash initially, but mitigates the risk of a drawn-out issue and projects an honest, integrity-driven image. In the events leading to 2018, Facebook took the second route. Information was sparse, and Facebook was not prepared to give an in-depth comment about investigations that were occurring. In the Week 6 online lecture, Dr. Hamish McLean outlines a number of steps or factors crucial to effective crisis management. The first of these is critical: quick initial response. Organizations should endeavor to respond quickly to any crisis. This prevents speculation and the spread of false or inaccurate information. It is hard enough for an organization to respond to the actual crisis. Responding to speculation only serves to draw the focus away from the real issue that the organization needs to address. So with everything that we've learnt about crisis management, how did Facebook respond? Well, within the first 24 hours, Facebook released a statement announcing an investigation into whether Cambridge Analytica still held the data. Not much else was said, and this was worrying. This was not good crisis management. 48 hours go by. The face of Facebook, the man everyone is waiting for, Mark Zuckerberg, is nowhere to be found. 4 days later, on the 20th of March, finally, a statement is issued from a Facebook representative on the whereabouts of Mark Zuckerberg. Mark, Sheryl, and their teams are working around the clock to get all the facts and take the appropriate action moving forward, because they understand the seriousness of the issue, the statement said. This isn't enough, and Zuckerberg draws enormous criticism for his lack of response. It's reported that even top-level executives are frustrated with his public inaction and lack of transparency. The media are having a field day. While we wait for Mark to come out of hiding, we should go back to the key steps in a crisis management plan. Dr. Hamish McLean also states that all information should be accurate. Messages should be consistent. Public safety should be made a priority, including expressions of concern, sympathy for the victims. All communications should be used, and always remember to include your employees in an initial response. All employees are spokespeople for the company. On March 21st, Facebook holds an internal briefing with all Facebook employees. This allows Facebook to control the message from its internal staff. And finally, after a full 5 days, almost 6 of speculation, Mark Zuckerberg emerges with a personal statement published on Facebook. The long statement addresses many points, including the concerns for data protection. We have a responsibility to protect your data, and if we can't, then we don't deserve to service you, Mark said. It also informs stakeholders of the steps that Facebook have taken to address the crisis, as well as steps that it still needs to take to ensure that the issue doesn't happen again. Zuckerberg goes on to provide statements to the media, is made available for interviews, and spends the entire year apologizing to its stakeholders. It's all very embarrassing, but Facebook survives, scarred but alive. Ultimately, Facebook's communication strategy was characteristic of the way a crisis should be handled. Zuckerberg became the man accountable. He held himself personally responsible for the failings of Facebook and charged himself with the job of fixing the problem. He became accountable for closing the gap between stakeholder expectation and the way the organization would act in the future. He delivered consistent messages and put in place a plan of action. 2018 was a tough year for Facebook, but Zuckerberg continued to front the media. He purchased ads in major US publications apologizing and delivering the same messages of the steps taken to prevent this from happening again, and eventually testifying to Congress. In his opening statement, he again delivers the same consistent message, taking necessary steps to make sure this does not happen again. There are a number of lessons that can be gleaned from this crisis. Firstly, prevention is always better than a cure. In 2015, Facebook were made aware of the data breach that had occurred using its platform. It did what it could to fix the problem behind the scenes, but it did minimal to address the real concern, stakeholder perception. The second lesson was how important a quick response is. Research shows that the speed in which a company responds to a crisis greatly impacts on the state at which the company comes out the other end. Coombs suggests a response that should be delivered with 1 hour of the crisis. The situation is compounded when you're one of the most recognizable faces for one of the world's most recognizable brands. And it cannot be overstated how important communication is during a crisis. It is everything. Keep your stakeholders informed, show them that you are fixing the problem, show them that you assume accountability, show empathy and concern, and you might just come out alive.